All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into Francis Bacon. Now, what's so interesting about him is that he lived a whole century before the Enlightenment, but he's the guy who basically drew up the blueprints for the entire thing. You know, when you look at the heavy hitters of the Enlightenment, we're talking Voltaire, Diderot, even Kant, they all pointed back to one guy, Francis Bacon. And it's not like they just gave him a polite nod. No, they saw him as the architect, the person who laid the very foundation they were all building on. So that's the big question, right? How did he pull it off? How did this guy, with his call for a total reset of how we think, end up laying the groundwork for, well, for the modern world? Let's get into it. Okay, so here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at how Bacon had to tear down all the old ways of thinking. Then, we'll see the new method he built to replace them. After that, we'll check out how that plan was used to create some of the Enlightenment's biggest projects. And finally, we'll touch on the debate about his legacy that, honestly, is still going on today. All right, first things first, before you can build anything new, you got to clear the land, right? And for Bacon, that meant launching what he called a most bitter assault on the philosophy of his day. I mean, he wasn't interested in making a few small tweaks. He was calling for a total, complete reset of human knowledge. So his first job, and maybe the most important one, was demolition. A radical demolition. He believed our minds are just cluttered. They're full of biases and errors that have kept us stuck in the past. And if we wanted to make any real progress, we had to first figure out what those errors were and just get rid of them. And he actually came up with a system for this. He pointed out 4 huge problems. He called them idols. And a great way to think about them is like glitches in our mental software. You know, flaws in our programming that mess up our thinking and stop us from seeing the world as it really is. So the first ones are the idols of the tribe. These are the errors that come with just being human. We're all wired this way. We jump to conclusions, we see patterns where there aren't any, and man, do we love evidence that proves what we already think. It's basically confirmation bias, but way back in the 17th century. Then you've got your personal biases. Bacon had a cool name for this, the idols of the cave. It's like we're each in our own little cave or our own echo chamber, shaped by how we were raised and what we've been through. And on top of that, there are the idols of the marketplace. This is all about the confusion that comes from language itself. You know, when words are fuzzy or when the words we have just don't quite capture what's really going on. But here's the kicker, the fourth idol, the idols of the theater. This was his direct shot at intellectual authority. He looked at all the big philosophies and theologies from the past and said, you know what these are? They're stage plays. They're beautiful, they make sense on their own terms, but they're just fictions, made-up worlds that have nothing to do with reality. And that, right there, gave him permission to question absolutely everything. Okay, so the ground is cleared. All these mental idols have been torn down. What's next? What did Bacon want to build in their place? Well, he came with a brand new blueprint for how to find truth, and it grew right out of his critique of everything that came before. And this table? This really lays out just how huge of a shift he was proposing. For hundreds of years, philosophy worked the way you see on the left, Aristotelian deduction. You'd start with some big general rule, some axiom that everyone just accepted, and you'd reason your way down from there. Bacon, he completely flipped that on its head. He championed induction. He said, no, you have to start from the bottom up. You start with specific things you can actually see and observe, and you build your way up to general laws. And this new method of his was super systematic. It wasn't just random observation. Step 1, you go out and describe the facts. Just gather the data from the real world. No jumping to conclusions. Step 2, you classify those facts, organize them into tables. And only then, after all that legwork, do you get to derive your conclusions. The big takeaway? Truth has to come from the evidence, not the other way around. And look, this wasn't just some dusty academic debate for him. The entire point of this new science was utility, usefulness. He famously said, knowledge is power, and he meant it. The goal wasn't just to sit around and think deep thoughts. It was to get practical results, to actually improve people's lives, and, as he put it, achieve the relief of man's estate. So this was a pretty revolutionary blueprint, right? But did anyone actually use it? Oh, yeah. In fact, it became the architectural plan for what was probably the single biggest, most ambitious project of the entire Enlightenment. I'm talking about the French Encyclopedia. When the editors Diderot and D'Alembert decided they were going to compile all of human knowledge into one massive collection, they needed a way to organize it all. And guess whose model they used? Yep, Francis Bacon's. They even gave him a huge shout-out right on the front page. Bacon's whole system was based on what he saw as the three main faculties of the human mind. You've got memory, which corresponds to history. You've got imagination, which gives us poetry. And then you've got the big one, reason, which is the branch for philosophy. And for Bacon, philosophy was a huge category that included pretty much all of science and theology. But this wasn't just a neat way to organize a book. This was a political statement. Check this out. By putting theology under the branch of philosophy, they were doing something incredibly radical. They were saying that religion is something to be examined by human reason, just like physics or ethics. It wasn't some separate, higher form of knowledge from God. Talk about a quiet but powerful challenge to the church's authority. But Bacon's vision went way beyond just organizing the knowledge we already had. He also wanted to create brand new institutions whose whole purpose was to generate more knowledge, all in the service of human progress. He wrote this incredible book, a utopian story called New Atlantis. And in it, he describes this fictional society that's basically run by scientists. And at the very center of this society is a place called Solomon's House. And what is Solomon's House? Well, it's pretty much the blueprint for a modern research university or a scientific institution like the Royal Society. And this place wasn't about some lone genius having a eureka moment in the bathtub. No way. It was a highly organized, collaborative system. I mean, look at these roles. You had merchants of light, who were basically scouts, gathering knowledge from all over the world. You had pioneers trying out new experiments. And then you had dowrymen, whose only job was to figure out how to turn these new discoveries into something useful for society. It was basically an assembly line for innovation. And the goal of this whole thing? It was crystal clear, and it was unbelievably ambitious. This was the ultimate endgame for his knowledge is power idea. To, and I'm quoting here, enlarge the bounds of human empire to the effecting of all things possible. In other words, to give humanity the tools to solve any problem and improve life for everyone. But, and this is a big but, this intense focus on utility, on power over nature, on material progress, well, it also planted the seeds for a huge debate about Bacon's legacy, a debate that we're still having right now. So on one side, you've got the Enlightenment thinkers like Kant. I mean, the guy dedicated his most important book, The Critique of Pure Reason, to Bacon. That's how much he respected him. But then, fast forward a generation, and you get philosophers like Hegel. And Hegel just rips into Bacon, calling his philosophy low-minded and only fit for civil servants and shopkeepers. Ouch. Why? Because he thought it was all about practical stuff and completely missed the higher, more spiritual purpose of philosophy. And that really brings us to the core tension of the modern world that Bacon helped build. He gave us the instruction manual for gaining incredible power through science. But did that manual include a chapter on ethics? On the wisdom to use that power correctly? That's the question that still hangs over us today, in this world so deeply shaped by his ideas. How do we balance this immense technological power we have with the wisdom and responsibility to wield it well?